everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video I'll be sharing with you all the books that I ended up reading in the month of January. So despite this being kind of like the first month of the year, I feel like I really hit the ground running. I read a lot of great books and I read a lot of books that I did not like, and despite like having like LASIK eye surgery where I had to kind of take a break from reading for a few days, I still managed to read quite a bit, and part of it too is because I've started to get back into audiobooks, especially ones that are like memoirs or nonfiction. I think for me that's what works best. So yeah, they're kind of all over in terms of genre, so let's go ahead and dive right in. So to start out the year, I first read Gilded and Cursed by Marissa Meyer, and this is the Rumpelstiltskin retelling duology, and the most recent book just came out, I want to say in November, so it just concluded relatively recently. But I've been a huge fan of Marissa Meyer in the past. I've loved a lot of her fairy tale retellings, the Lunar Chronicles, Heartless. I just really have enjoyed all the books that she's put out. So I was really excited to dive into this one, especially for the fairy tale of Rumpelstiltskin. That's not one that I am as familiar with, I should say, so I was a little bit nervous going in just because I didn't really know too much, but I really love this duology. So it follows this girl who is kind of been told her entire life that she's been cursed by the god because she has these eyes that are kind of gold with kind of a wheel in them, and that is the sign of the god of lies. So she's been cursed with kind of telling these elaborate stories that no one believes. So on one of the full moons, when the Elle King goes around and kind of collects all the dead and like wreaks havoc on the human world, she ends up crossing paths with him, and it kind of goes off from there. I will say the third book I gave a 3 out of 5, or the first book I gave 3 out of 5 stars, and this one I gave 4 out of 5 stars. And I will say the first one in particular, I felt the first 100 pages to be really gripping. We kind of really hit the ground running, and Marissa Meyer was able to really create a really kind of creepy, eerie world, especially with the Elle King, and just describing like the silence of like a really cold winter night, but then the kind of that eeriness, like the fear of a like something bad happening. Like, I thought that was really well done, but the middle part of the book really struggled in terms of pacing. It kind of felt repetitive, and it kind of went on these little side tangents that I didn't think were really relevant to the story, but the last 150 pages really drew me in. We kind of pick up the pace again, and the intensity and that like fear that she's able to convey through the main character to the reader, I think was really well done, and I was really gripped. So as soon as I finished Gilded, I ended up picking up Cursed, which I said I did really enjoy a lot more. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. I thought it wrapped up everything really nicely, and a lot of the pacing issues that I had in the first book I think got much more like were kind of resolved, and she was able to kind of iron them out. I think in this case too, this was more kind of adult dark fantasy, kind of leaning towards on that spectrum. I feel like her other ones have been more kind of like YA, so this one was kind of her first more kind of adult fantasy, and I feel like this is where she really kind of finds her footing. I just really loved the intensity of it. I felt like it was like go go go, and at the end I was really kind of like really emotionally connected to the characters, and I thought it just did a really good job. And in this case too, I kind of better believed in the romance. Like in this one, there is kind of an insta-love romance that's kind of going on, and I didn't find it very believable because we don't get to see a lot of interactions between the two love interests, but in this one they're kind of forced to have to spend more time together, and I felt like their love for each other was much more believable in that sense. So yeah, like I said, I enjoyed this one a lot more, and like I said, if you struggled with the first one, I think it is worth to go through and read the second one because I thought it was really well done. I thought she wrapped up everything nicely, and you can definitely tell she has improved and has become more comfortable with kind of writing in this genre. Next up, this is an audiobook that I listened to that I got from the library, and it is Have I Told You This Already by Lauren Graham, and this is a collection of essays of things. I've read her other books like Talking as Fast as I Can, and so this kind of talks about kind of post Gilmore Girls revival and some of the things. So she talks about the pandemic, having friends that are younger than her, kind of 90s and like 90s fashion trends that are starting to come back now, just kind of like random stuff, which I really enjoyed actually. I think from the audiobook too, you kind of pick up on some of the humor that's integrated in this, and because she's reading it herself, you kind of pick up on that, and you can kind of also hear more of the emotional aspects of the story through their voice. You can really feel some of the emotion, and so I really enjoyed this. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Like, it's not anything mind-blowing, but I think if you're a fan of Lauren Graham, if you like Gilmore Girls, I think the audiobook is the way to go, because it's just like Lorelai's basically reading this to you. But there were parts where I actually like laughed out loud. There were some parts that I thought were really interesting to hear her talk about some certain life experiences, like beauty standards that are just really unattainable, and I really like how she kind of dove into this. So like I said, if you're a fan of Lauren Graham, I think you will like this. I gave this a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, we have the first 1-star book of the year, and it is The Stories We Tell by Joanna Gaines. I've really enjoyed like Fixer Upper. Like, I love her design style, so I was very curious when she had this book come out, and I feel like it was just false advertising is how I describe it. It kind of, especially with the title too, you think it's like a memoir talking about, you know, her experience of, you know, building the company. That's how I thought it was going to be, or, you know, like how, you know, they eventually got to where they are now, which I thought would have been interesting. But this is neither a memoir nor is it a self-help book, because it talks about like other random things in here, like just, you know, people like bullies. She talks about bullying and that from high school, but how she ended up being able to become like homecoming queen in her final year. Like, I just like, I didn't feel like this book is even necessary. I feel like you just need to read the introduction, and that basically tells you everything, because every chapter after that is just like a reiteration of what was said in the introduction. So she finds new ways to write the same things, and it's not really a self-help book. There isn't a lot. She's like giving you advice, but she doesn't advertise this or classify this as a self-help book, but it's not a memoir either, so I don't understand the point of this. It was a waste of the money that I spent on it, so this will be going to Half Price Books. It was just very disappointing, and I listened to this on audiobook too, and she does narrate it, and so I literally listened to it on 2 speed, because I was like, I just need to get through it, and it was just repeating the same things over and over and over again, and it wasn't really helpful. So I thought this one was just really disappointing. I think if you want to kind of just stick with the fixer-upper stuff, just kind of stick with the TV show. Next, this is another disappointing read, and it is Dark of Night by Barbara Nickless. This is the second book in the Evan Sterling series. I read the first book back in December, and it was like okay. I gave that a 3 out of 5 stars. I wasn't really blown away by it, as I have been with her Sydney Parnell series, but I was very curious to give this series another chance, and this one kind of disappointed me, and I think from going forward, I'm just not going to continue on with this series. So this follows Evan, who is a semitologist at the university, and he works collaboratively with the homicide department through the Chicago PD. And so when one of his former, I guess like kind of mentors is found dead in a car with a snake, it kind of leads to this investigation going down a road of stolen artifacts. And that sounds like something that would be really interesting, and just given the premise, and I do really love archaeology. I did one of my double majors during my undergrad was in anthropology, so like all the archaeology stuff I really am passionate about and I find really enjoyable to learn. And yeah, this one was just disappointing. I gave this a 2 out of 5 stars. You can tell the author did a really good job researching the kind of history behind these things, and you do get kind of you can tell it's well researched, but at times it just feels very info dumpy, where the characters will go to an expert, and that expert goes on a, you know, 3-page monologue about the history of these Egyptian things or whatever, and that just kind of really takes me out of the story, and it kind of affects the pacing in here. And I think especially too because in the first book his friendship with the homicide detective Addie is very much kind of a focal point of the series, but she's barely in this one. And Evan as a character I don't find as compelling to really care for. I feel like too, like with Sydney Purnell, she's very flawed. Like she has all these problems, but you can't help but not root for her. In this case, I feel like Evan is very one-dimensional, and we don't really get to, like, I don't feel like I'm rooting for him in these instances. It was just a little bit boring, and yeah, definitely one that I'm disappointed about because I have loved her other series. But I don't think this is one that I'm going to continue on, and I'm going to give to half price books. Yeah, which is disappointing because, like I said, I am a fan of this author's work, but in this case it was just, it didn't, all the stars did not align. It was just a little bit disappointing, and I think if you are a fan of the Sydney Purnell series, I would skip out on this one because, like I said, there's not a lot going for it. And I think part of the sell for Sydney Purnell series is that you are so connected to her and what she's going through. In this case, I feel like I still don't even know these characters after 2 books, which isn't a good sign. And lastly, to wrap up the month with a book that I actually did enjoy after the 2 books that I did not enjoy, I ended up finishing Jade War by Fonda Lee. This is the 2nd book in the Greenbone trilogy, Greenbone saga, sorry. And because this is the 2nd book in the series, I don't want to spoil anything for you, but basically the premise is that it takes place in a, I would say kind of like the 90s in terms of technology, on the fictional island of Kong, and this island is the only country in the world that has the natural resource of jade. And jade is this like stone that basically people who are susceptible to it can have superhuman powers, whether it is, you know, they can move fast or they can revive hearts, like these type of things. So it gives you, these people, a lot of power, and you can see how access to jade could be very beneficial and like desirable to a lot of countries. And so on the island of Kong, there are 2 clans that are at war with each other, and in the scope of this one too kind of expands outside of the island of Kong in regards to kind of the global politics of this world. And in addition to kind of being a fantasy, I think it is a very politically intrigued like novel in particular. Like I feel like the politics and dynamics of this world is very much at the forefront, in addition to kind of jade kind of being the fantastical element within this urban fantasy, which I think makes it for a very interesting read, and I just really enjoy it. The first book, I will say, it took me a while to get through, like the first 100 pages or so, because you're kind of just thrown into this world and trying to figuring out all these characters and who's who. Like they literally have a cast of characters and which like clan they belong to and their role. Like they literally have like 3 or 4 pages of all these characters. So that is one thing. There's a lot of side characters, but this one too, we got to really kind of see these characters kind of really take their own and go on different paths, and especially too in this case you kind of follow different narratives that eventually become interconnected, and you can see the threads and impacts of these different people throughout the years. And I'm told too that the 3rd book basically covers several decades, so I'm very curious to see the time jumps in here. This one covers the span of like roughly 5 years, and I think it was done really well. Just kind of seeing everything that this family has to go through. This author does not shy away from killing off characters, which I think makes the stakes a lot higher, because she, like, you can tell this author will kill characters, so it makes everything, it stakes a lot higher because you're not sure if these characters are going to make it out alive. There's a lot of, in addition to the politics of this world, there's a lot of like action-packed stuff going on as well. A lot of parts left me shocked, and yeah, I think this has definitely become one of my favorite fantasy series as of late, so I definitely can't wait to continue on and read the last book. I feel like it is going to destroy me. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what books you read this month and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.